So the next great sort of really big, sort of huge event that will always get mentioned in any history of Henry I is the White Ship. And what that is that his heir, William the Aetheling, as I said, he had tons of illegitimate children.
But only one
legitimate boy.
Yeah.
A William the Aetheling. And he was a grown man because, as I say, Henry lives to be quite old, reigning for 35 years. And they were both going back from Normandy back to England. By this time, people were hopping across the channel all the time. And one night, apparently it was at night, they were both going to go back to England from Normandy. And William the Aetheling, being a young, hot-headed man, wanted to race his father. And they had a royal yacht. Churchill describes it as a royal yacht, which is obviously what's the word when you take modern things? And it's obviously an anachronism. Yeah. He calls it the royal yacht. It was known as the White Ship.
Right.
And he tried to beat his father back. So where Henry I said, "Oh, it's getting dark. It's a little bit dangerous. I'll just leave it till tomorrow or something." William the Aetheling says, "No, let's go tonight." And he had his entourage, and they're all drinking and everything, and it gets wrecked.
Of course, it does.
So if I can read a line, a paragraph from Sir Charles Oman again. I'm a big fan of Oman, if you haven't guessed. Quote, the important... he starts this paragraph by talking about Matilda, the daughter, who in the next generation is absolutely key figure, absolutely unbelievably key. She has a civil war. So she goes on to be hugely important. The importance
is this Stephen?
Yeah, that's the Matilda. Matilda Maud, that's the same person.
Right, yeah.
She has a civil war with Stephen,
yeah,
her own cousin, Stephen of Blois. She would, in fact, before she was married, later she gets married to the Duke of Anjou, Geoffrey Plantagenet, which is where that name comes from. But before that, she was married off very young to the Holy Roman Emperor.
Right, okay.
Very young. She was like, I think it says it here, she was like 14 or something. Anyway, Charles Oman says this, quote, "The importance of this latter marriage lay in the fact that Prince William had died in the intervening space and that Matilda, a widowed princess, whose first husband had been Emperor Henry V, was now the King of England's sole heiress after this shipwreck, where William the Aetheling is killed, drowns. The end of her brother had been strange and tragic. He was following his father from Normandy to England when a drunken skipper ran his vessel upon the reef at Chatterville, only 5 miles from the Norman shore. The prince was hurried by his followers into the only boat that the ship possessed, lifeboat, and might have escaped had he not seen his half-sister, the Countess of Perche, had been left behind. He bade the oarsmen put back, but when they reached the ship, a crowd of panic-stricken passengers sprang down into the boat and swamped it. The prince was drowned, and with him his half-brother Richard, his half-sister, the Countess of Perche, the Earl of Chester, and many of the chief persons of the realm. Only one sailor lad survived to tell the sad tale of the White Ship. When the news of the death of his only legitimate son reached the king, he was prostrated by it for many days, and was said that he never smiled again, though he lived for 15 years after the disaster. But if the chronicles speak true, the death of William was more of a loss to his father than to the realm, for they report that he had been a proud and cruel youth who bid fair to reproduce some of the evil qualities of his uncle, William Rufus." End quote.
Wow.
But nevertheless, the heir to the throne is
it's certainly bad for William, for Henry.
For England. I mean, even though Oman just said it's worse for Henry personally than it is for England, it's really bad for England.
Well,
because what it spells
succession crisis.
A succession crisis.
Yeah.
And as we've already said, there's a civil war. A civil war happens.
Yeah.
So even though he lives for another 15 years, that is the keynote thing from now on. What are we going to do? He gets remarried, and I think he does. They do try to sire more children, but he doesn't. So he's left with what to do. He could either pick one of his other heirs, like a great nephew or a nephew or something like that. There's plenty of guys around he could have picked. But what he opts to do is to make all the barons, marries Matilda off to the Duke of Anjou, one of the most powerful people in France, in Europe, Western Europe, and make her the heir as something like a female king. Churchill describes her as a female king. And he makes all the barons of Normandy and England and his other realms swear oaths multiple times over this 15 years that when he dies, they will recognise her as Queen of England. It hadn't been done before.
Any reason for this?
Well, she was grown up and she was powerful. She was no pushover. There was no other options. He didn't seem to trust any of the other people in his family.
Fair enough.
Right. Okay, so one last paragraph here from Omar. He says, but trusting his daughter's fate to the future, Henry preferred in his but trusting his daughter's fate to the future, Henry preferred in his life's work and left. Sorry, I've read that slightly wrong, but in his life's work, and he left his kingdom behind at his death in 1135 with a full treasury and an obedient baronage and largely extended borders. Not only had he won Normandy, but he had completed the conquest of South Wales and established large colonies of English and Flemings about Pembroke and in the peninsula of Gower. With his three brothers-in-law, who reigned in Scotland one after the other, he dwelt on friendly terms. They did him homage, and he left them unmolested. They were wise princes who knew the value of peace, and under them the Scotch kingdom, that's what he's written, the Scotch kingdom advanced in civilization and wealth and grew more and more assimilated to its great southern neighbour. Okay, so just get on to William Henry I's death.
So generally a productive reign for Henry then.
Right, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So we can, criticise them all we want, but at the end of the day, the results are the results.
Exactly, yeah. They speak for themselves. It didn't all fall apart while he lived.
Yeah.
And it does pretty much upon his death.
Right.
So it shows that, like an Alexander figure, it all fell apart since he died. But whilst he lived, there was this iron gauntlet holding it all together, and it couldn't be beat. It worked. Finally, he dies in 1035, famously of quote a surfeit of lampreys.
You mean 1135?
Oh, sorry, did I say 1035?
Yeah.
Sorry, it is 1135, of course. Apparently, he was eating. He had a surfeit, i.e. too many, lampreys. And lampreys are disgusting. You know, they are like...
they're a sort of fish thing, aren't they?
Yeah, they're like a worm eel thing with like this big sucker mouth.
Yeah, I haven't eaten them.
Yeah, they're disgusting.
Right.
Today, only French people would really dream of eating lampreys. An Englishman doesn't really eat lampreys.
Of course not.
It's really gross.
Eel pie, for Christ's sake.
Right, yeah. Oh, yeah, but we do eat jellied eels and things, so I am joking around.
So where would you even get an eel? Like, it's always the stereotype. I've never had eel. I wouldn't mind trying it.
I've had jellied eels loads of times.
Is it good?
One from East London. So
okay.
It's an acquired taste. I don't mind it. It is an acquired taste, though, especially jellied.
Yeah.
I like all sorts of shellfish, but some people are absolutely turned off by mussels or winkles or anything like that. Yeah. I quite like them.
Right, okay.
But yeah, if you've never had jellied eels before, you'd probably be...
I'd definitely try them if I had the opportunity.
Yeah, it's not too bad. If you like fish and shellfish...
I don't mind it.
Yeah, it's fine. It's not that bad. But even I will turn my nose up at lampreys. Apparently Henry I had a surfeit of lampreys and he killed over and died. He was old. But...
Death by lamprey.
Yeah, that always goes hand in hand when people talk about the death of Henry I. That giant meal of lampreys. So on the 1st of December, 1135, King Henry died. Though a selfish and unscrupulous man, he had been a good king. And the troubles which followed his death soon taught the English how much they had owed to his strong and ruthless hand.
I like this. He's a terrible guy, but he ruled really well, actually, Like accidentally good king.
Yeah. If I could read one last paragraph, I'll let... Okay, Churchill also sets up what will be the next bit of the story. It won't be the next epochs, as we said, but whenever we do carry on the story, it is the story of Matilda or Maud and her civil war. So Sir Winston Churchill, in his Birth of Britain, says this, quote, King Henry, in the grey close of his life, set himself to fill the void with his daughter, Maud, as female king. He spent his remaining years in trying to establish a kind of, quote, pragmatic sanction, quote, for a family succession which would spare his widespread domains from civil war. At the age of 13, Maud had been married to the Holy Roman Emperor. In 1125, 5 years after the White Ship sank, he died, and at 22, she was a widow and an empress. Not really technically an empress, but we'll talk about that whenever we get onto this, the next bit of the story. We have many records of this remarkable princess, of whom it was said, quote, she had, and this isn't from a chronicle, she had the nature of a man in the frame of a woman.
Oh, very Elizabethan.
Yeah. And she was a formidable character, just like her father and grandfather. Don't mess with her at all. Churchill says she was fierce, proud, hard, cynical, living for politics above all other passions, however turbulent. She was fitted to bear her part in any war and be the mother of one of the greatest English kings. She was the mother of Henry II, Henry Plantagenet, who's kind of undeniably one of our greatest kings.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.